Well, welcome to session number 6 of From Anxiety to Intimacy. I remember towards the end of my college career, my sister convinced me to run a marathon with her. And I discovered it's really true. When you go out on your long runs and training, you can hit what's called the runner's high. All your chemicals conspire to make you feel euphoric. But you can also hit some real lows. And I remember there was one long run when I was by myself running for miles, and I hit a real low where suddenly everything in my body hurt. I felt so discouraged. I felt like quitting, not just the run, but everything. I felt like it started to rain. So I just sat. But then I realized, man, I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I got to keep moving. And so into that moment, I needed something to inspire me. And I started thinking about my Bible study leader, Chris, because he had run the Houston Marathon the year before when it froze. There was ice on the runners. But I remember going to cheer him on, and I remember watching him keep running in the midst of his difficulty. And as I thought about that, it inspired me in my own run. And I got up and started to walk again. And the more I thought about him finishing his race well, the more I realized I want to finish my race well. And so I got up to a jog. And by the end of it, I remember the more I thought about him pushing through and persevering, the more I wanted to be that kind of man too. And so I was sprinting through my campus, tears down my face, yelling, I want to be like Chris, because I did. And I needed him in front of me to inspire me and instruct me to work even in the midst of my concerns and my cares. And I mention that to you because that's the last piece here. We've been talking about releasing worry and enjoying intimacy with God. And we talked about the fact that we get to release worry, and the peace of God that transcends understanding will guard our hearts. And we talked about how that's worked for me and you. We have permission to take our cares to the King. But then we said that's just part one, the releasing of our anxiety. Then we're meant to move to embracing God's word, that I fill my mind with the lovely thoughts of who God is and what he's up to. And then I try to enjoy God's world, that he's put good out there that I can embrace. But then Paul gives us one more key in Philippians chapter 4, and that is to enter God's work, to enter useful activity along with a vibrant community. And you see, he says it in verse 9. He says, whatever you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. And do you see the parallel? When I release my concerns to God, the peace of God will guard me. And when I embrace the work of God, the God of peace will be with me. It's one thing to go through the mental and emotional work of unloading my cares and then trying to focus on God's word, but at some point you have to rise up from your chair and move out into the world. And Paul says, key off of some inspiring people. What you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, do that. So enter God's word, embrace his world, and then enter his work. Be a part of something productive and good in the world. That can be deeply satisfying even in the midst of uncertainty. I remember for me, my first job was as a youth pastor, and I had no idea what a youth pastor did. And I was at a church plant that had no money. So I went and tried to interview all these different youth pastors, and they all had these huge ministries with multiple staffs and all this equipment, and it all felt overwhelming to me. It didn't feel freeing, it felt tyrannizing. Like, I don't know how to build that. I don't know what I'm doing. This feels like a waste. I don't know where my life is going, and I wanted to quit. And I remember I confided in a mentor about that. And I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, hey, Ben, let me tell you what works for me. He said, I've realized I exist to walk with God, and my ministry flows out of that walk. He said, right now I do it at this ministry. They may fire me, I may go somewhere else, but I never lose my purpose. And he challenged me to do the same. And so I remember I woke up the next day and it's like, that's simply what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to know God and then make him known. So I didn't know the mechanics of how to do that as a youth minister, but I realized I'm made to know him. So I did what my mentor taught me to do, to sit and to unload my anxieties on the Lord, embrace his word. And then I got up, and we had a handful of kids on our ministry, so I called them. And I would sit with them and read them what I was learning. And they started to invite their friends. And suddenly we went to 4 kids, to 8 kids, to 10, to 20, to hundreds. And I looked and wow, we're building a ministry. And you know what? If I would have just been stuck in the sense of overwhelming and anxiety, we may not have moved forward. And even though I didn't have all the answers, I knew I was able to release my cares to the Lord, embrace his word. And then when I keyed off a vibrant community, a good leader, I could step into useful activity and just do the next right thing. And as I did that, I was able to be successful. William Cooper famously wrestled with depression deeply in his life, but his pastor loved him, John Newton. John Newton, who had been a slave trader until God radically saved him, and he wrote the song, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And he wrote hymns like that as a pastor. As he worked to end the slave trade, he had this depressed and worried and anxious young man, William Cooper, in his church. And so he told Cooper, who was a creative, hey, I promised my people a new hymn every week. Write a new song of praise to God every week. I don't know about you, that would create anxiety in me. But Cooper, who was a creative, realized, okay. And so rather than being caught up in the clouds of worry, his pastor lovingly gave him useful activity. And there in the midst of a vibrant community, he was given useful activity. He wrote some beautiful hymns that helped assuage his pain and others. So let me encourage you, release your anxiety to the Lord. He cares enough to listen. Embrace his word, let it fill your mind, and then enter his work. Enter a productive way of living. And by God's grace, the clouds will lift, and you'll look up, and you will have lived a great life. So I encourage you, there's a great gift being offered to us from God, that we get a chance to move, stumbling and imperfectly, but still a chance to move from anxiety to intimacy. So let me challenge you. Find some productive work. Get involved in a church. Surround yourself with a community where you can serve, and see if you might enjoy the pleasure of self-forgetting. Love you guys. Praying for you. Cheering you on. We'll see you next time.